Title: The Dark Ritual. Main story: Nicholas and Jane couldn't believe their luck. They had just received a letter informing them that Jane's uncle had passed away, and he had left them his old house, which was over 100 years old. The house was situated in the countryside, and it had been abandoned for years. The couple was excited to move in and start a new life in the country. When they arrived at the house, they were taken aback by its grandeur. It was an enormous house with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and grand staircases. The couple spent the first few days exploring the house, and they couldn't believe their luck. However, things started to take a dark turn as the days went by. One night, Nicholas woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. He assumed it was Jane, but when he got up to check, he found her sound asleep in bed. He brushed it off as his imagination and went back to bed. However, the sound of footsteps became a regular occurrence every night, and it started to drive Nicholas insane. One afternoon, Jane was exploring the attic when she found an old diary hidden away in a trunk. The diary belonged to Jane's great-grandmother, who had lived in the house over 100 years ago. The diary was filled with dark and disturbing entries about her experiences in the house. The entries described strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and sightings of a ghostly figure. Jane was spooked by the diary but decided not to tell Nicholas. However, she soon realized that it was a mistake. The ghostly figure described in the diary started to appear to her in her dreams. She would wake up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, and screaming. Nicholas would try to comfort her, but the dreams kept getting worse. One night, Nicholas decided to confront the source of the strange noises. Armed with a flashlight, he explored the house and stumbled upon a hidden room behind a bookcase. Inside the room, he found an old chest. As he was about to open it, he heard a voice behind him. He turned around to find Jane standing behind him, her eyes glowing in the dark. Jane attacked Nicholas, and he realized that he was dealing with something far beyond his understanding. Jane had been possessed by the ghostly figure described in the diary. The possession had driven her insane, and she was now a vessel for the evil spirit that had haunted the house for over 100 years. Nicholas managed to escape the house, but he knew he couldn't leave Jane behind. He sought the help of a local priest, who agreed to perform an exorcism. The exorcism was long and brutal, but they managed to expel the evil spirit from Jane's body. The couple left the house and never looked back. They had experienced something beyond their understanding, and they knew they could never go back. The house still stands, abandoned and haunted by the evil spirit that had possessed Jane. It remains a warning to those who dare to venture into its dark and twisted world. Despite their traumatic experience, Nicholas and Jane struggled to move on from what had happened. They found it hard to forget the horrors they had witnessed, and the trauma continued to haunt them. Nicholas tried to distract himself by throwing himself into his work, but he found it hard to concentrate. Jane became increasingly withdrawn and spent most of her days lost in thought. One day, Nicholas received a call from a distant relative, informing him that Jane's uncle had left them something else in his will. He had left them a piece of land, deep in the heart of the forest. The couple was hesitant to take up the offer, but they eventually decided to give it a chance. They hoped that the change of scenery would help them move on from their traumatic experience. The land was a few hours' drive from their home, and they decided to take a weekend trip to explore it. As they drove deeper into the forest, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The land was shrouded in a thick fog, and the trees were so dense that they blocked out most of the sunlight. They eventually reached the plot of land, which was a small clearing in the middle of the forest. As they explored the area, they stumbled upon an old cabin. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for years, but it was surprisingly well maintained. The door was slightly ajar, and Nicholas pushed it open. Inside, they found a strange book lying on a table. The book was bound in human skin, and it was covered in strange symbols and markings. Nicholas and Jane knew they should leave the book alone, but they couldn't help but feel drawn to it. As they flipped through the pages, they realized that the book contained dark and ancient rituals. They knew they had stumbled upon something evil, and they knew they needed to leave the cabin and the forest as soon as possible. As they turned to leave, they heard a sound coming from outside. They peered out the window and saw a figure standing in the clearing. The figure was tall and cloaked in black, and it had no face. They knew they were in grave danger and ran towards their car. However, as they drove away, they realized that the figure was following them. The figure pursued them for miles, and they eventually lost it. They never spoke of what happened that day, and they never returned to the forest. However, they soon realized that the evil they had encountered was not something they could escape. It followed them wherever they went, and they knew that they could never truly be safe from the darkness that had taken hold of their lives. The darkness that had taken hold of Nicholas and Jane's lives began to consume them. They started to experience strange occurrences and unexplainable events. Objects in their home would move on their own, and they would hear strange whispers in the dead of night. They tried to ignore these occurrences, but they only got worse as time went on. Nicholas started to have vivid nightmares, and Jane began to see strange apparitions around the house. One night, as they were both asleep, they were awoken by the sound of footsteps in their hallway. They got out of bed and cautiously made their way to the hallway, only to find that it was empty. As they turned to go back to bed, they saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was the same one they had seen in the forest, tall and cloaked in black, with no face. The figure began to move towards them, and they ran back to their bedroom, locking the door behind them. They could hear the figure outside, scratching at the door, trying to get in. They knew they had to do something to stop the evil that was haunting them. They remembered the book they had found in the cabin, and they knew that it contained the key to banishing the darkness. They searched through the book and found a ritual that could banish evil spirits. They gathered the necessary ingredients and performed the ritual in their home. As they chanted the ancient words, they felt a sense of peace wash over them. The darkness that had consumed their lives began to lift, and they knew they were finally safe. They never spoke of the horrors they had experienced again, and they never returned to the forest. They knew that the evil they had encountered was still out there, waiting for its next victims. Nicholas and Jane lived the rest of their lives in peace, but they always remained vigilant, knowing that the darkness could return at any moment. They had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of delving too deep into the unknown, and they knew that some secrets were better left buried. Years went by, and Nicholas and Jane tried their best to forget about the horror they had encountered. They moved to a new city and started a family. They had a daughter whom they loved dearly, and they tried to live a normal life. But the darkness that had once consumed them was still out there, waiting. One night, they woke up to find their daughter missing. They searched the house, but she was nowhere to be found. As they searched, they heard strange whispers and saw shadowy figures moving around the house. They knew that the evil they had encountered had come back for revenge. They remembered the book and the ritual they had used to banish the evil years ago. They knew that it was their only hope of saving their daughter. They found the book and prepared the ingredients for the ritual. They chanted the ancient words, and a bright light filled the room. The darkness was banished once again, and their daughter appeared, unharmed. But they knew that the darkness would always be out there, waiting to strike again. They made a vow to never forget the horrors they had encountered and to always be vigilant against the darkness. Nicholas and Jane knew that they had faced something beyond their understanding, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had learned the hard way that some secrets were better left undiscovered, and that sometimes, the darkness could never truly be banished. After the incident, Nicholas and Jane decided to move again, this time to a remote area far away from the city. They hoped that by living in seclusion, they would be able to protect themselves and their daughter from any further danger. One night, as they were sitting by the fire, they heard strange noises coming from outside. They got up to investigate, and they saw that the forest was alive with dark shadows and eerie whispers. Nicholas and Jane knew that they had to act fast if they were to protect their family. They remembered the book and the ritual they had used to banish the darkness before. They gathered the ingredients and began to chant the ancient words. As they chanted, the darkness began to recede, and the forest became calm once again. They knew that they had defeated the darkness, but they also knew that it would always be out there, waiting for its next victim. They decided to keep the book and the ritual a secret, knowing that they could never let the darkness fall into the wrong hands. Years went by, and their daughter grew up to be a strong and brave woman, just like her parents. She knew about the darkness that had haunted her family and was always vigilant against it. Nicholas and Jane knew that they had faced something beyond their understanding, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had learned the hard way that some secrets were better left undiscovered, and that sometimes, the darkness could never truly be banished. But they also knew that as long as they had each other and their daughter, they could face anything. They were a family bound by the horrors they had faced, but also by the love that had kept them together.